I would talk to recruiters at some of the most recognizable brands that we all know and love who said that it is not as easy as you think to get people to work for us because they just care about different things. And when they see behind the curtain, they realize that, yeah, the brand might be awesome and the product might be awesome, but hey, there's some disconnect going on there. Ultimately, where this goes to is that competing for talent is a real thing. Even like some of the most well-funded startups who don't have the brand cred struggle to recruit. And now that playing field is going to be a lot more level because they can win on some of the things that these larger brands can't, who think that they can just rely on their logo to attract talent. Some of these startups who are doing amazing things, who are doing things against the grain, doing things that are just like culturally different and unique, can put that stuff out and say, sure, maybe we can't compete necessarily on comp or maybe on some of these other things, but this is why we're different or this is why we're better. That opportunity now exists.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimpson, and you're listening to the unique podcast series that flips the marketing conversation from external to internal, where we talk about everything you need to know about how to engage and empower your employees to become advocates of the company brand. And why is that important? Because it's an awesome way to build a brand and drive growth. Of course, season 2 of the Internal Marketing Podcast is sponsored by Workshop. Thank you, Workshop, for partnering with me on this season 2 of the series. And of course, if you're curious, if you're looking for more practical resources and powerful perspectives about building a great company culture, then the Happy Monday Club by Workshop is the place for you. Every Monday, the team at Workshop puts together an inspiring and uplifting list of articles from some of the world's best workplaces, along with their own latest internal marketing and communication templates, and of course, the occasional giveaway or surprise. The Happy Monday Club newsletter is designed to help you create a positive, supported, impactful culture at any company size. So join the over 10,000 culture-focused leaders today who are part of the Happy Monday Club, and you can join them by signing up at happymondayclub.com. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. And this conversation today is a little different, but I believe it's very important and needed to be explored. It actually was inspired by a post on LinkedIn that I saw from one of my awesome guests. Well, the awesome guest I'm having today. All my guests are awesome, but it specifically spoke about the whole matter of employer branding and how we leverage the brand or the company brand as an employer of choice to attract great talent. And when we talk about internal marketing, yes, admittedly, the objective of internal marketing to really achieve the objective of employee brand advocacy, we think about how does that help the brand to grow and to attract clients to grow revenue, which is great. But it's also a great tool to attract talent because let's face it, engaged employees, what do? They talk about the great experience they're having with where they work. They usually talk about it on social especially, and other people are watching, and great talent sees that and says, hey, how can I be a part of that great company? And that's how it works. And so I said, Nate is the person to have this conversation as the person, I guess, the creator of the post who would have inspired that in my mind. And so I'm so happy I reached out to him on LinkedIn and he gratefully accepted. I mean, he was probably the fastest acceptance I've ever gotten on LinkedIn. So I'm so glad he's here. And Nate Guggia, who is the co-founder of Before You Apply, and I know we're gonna hear more about his company in a minute, or certainly towards the end of the discussion. Nate, I'm so very happy to have you here. Thank you and welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is great. This is a really important topic. There's a lot to get into about this and the execution and the potential results and stuff. So I'm ready to go.
Yeah, let's do this. And let's level set a bit because employer branding, for those folks who follow you on LinkedIn, of course, we are all familiar with what that is. Some people could figure it out. Could you just level set for us and share with us what's your working definition of employer branding? And in your experience, do enough companies even care about it these days?
Okay, so I'll give you my definition of it, or even like how I think about it, and then we could talk about companies and their level of care. I see employer branding as it's the perception that either job seekers or employees have about what it's like to work at your organization. The most important thing to understand is that perception exists regardless of what you do as a company. So that perception is out there. It's employees have it in their minds or in their experiences, and job candidates, whether they see you as an organization because they know your brand or they're actively looking, they just like pick up and create their own story. And I think the active employer branding is putting intention behind that and trying to influence that perception. It's not influencing it in a way that is disingenuous or inauthentic, but it's putting intentionality out there, because otherwise you're just like leaving it up to chance and perception. And so that's how I think about it. But I think like the one thing that I think people don't tend to like not stop and think about is like, okay, whether I do something or I don't, the perception of what it's like to work here exists. And then you kind of start from there. Now, as far as like level of care and intention that companies put behind it, it's actually very little. It's a very interesting space to be in, because it is now becoming more of like, at least like in the HR or talent acquisition industry, it's now becoming much more like talked about in mainstream. But so having conversations about employer branding are happening more and more often. Companies, or at least like the people who care about this stuff, are starting to think about it more. But if you look at like budget allocation and resource allocation, things like that, it is very skewed at organizations. A lot of people are fighting the good fight internally to like try to get something so they can start marketing themselves as an employer. So
Thanks for that. I feel like the answer to my next question is obvious based on how you would have kind of set it up, but why should companies even care about employer branding? Let's just be real and put it out there. Why should they care? Why should they be putting more resources behind it?
yeah, so in the current state of the market, whether you're a buyer or you're a job candidate, the way that your company treats people is really important. We are growing like more in the direction of like not seeing those two things as separate. We as consumers of things, you could place a lot of stuff in the category of things. It could be everything from a toothbrush that you buy to like literally a job, which in my opinion is like the biggest enterprise sale that there is.
Yeah.
We have options now, especially if you're like competitive talent, you have a lot of options. And with options come choice and different like levels of decision making and due diligence and things like that. And so companies, I think at one point used to be able to sit back and either rely on their brand recognition or rely on some things that like weren't directly tied to their culture and their employees and like the things that like we just now care about as individuals. Can't do that anymore. I have a lot of conversations with people in the industry. It's one of the things that like I enjoy doing most and learn the things that I learned. And I was surprised at first, but now I'm not anymore, where I would talk to people at recruiters at some of the most recognizable brands that we all know and love and use, who said that like, it is not as easy as you think to get people to work for us, because they just care about different things. And when they see behind the curtain, they realize that, yeah, the brand might be awesome and the product might be awesome. But hey, there's some like disconnect going on there. And so I know this is like a kind of a long-winded answer about like why it matters. Ultimately, like where this goes to is that competing for talent is a real thing. Startups, especially, even like some of the most well-funded startups who don't have the brand cred, struggle to recruit. And now that playing field is going to be a lot more level, because they can win on some of the things that these larger brands can't, who think that they can just rely on their logo to attract talent. Some of these startups who are doing amazing things, who are doing things against the grain, doing things that are just like culturally different and unique, can put that stuff out and say like, sure, maybe we can't compete necessarily on comp or maybe on some of these other things, but this is why we're different, or this is why we're better. That opportunity now exists. It's really cool. It's really cool for those who want to run with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of those who run with it, I'm sure in your experience, you've been encountering, working with, and certainly know of companies who are implementing great strategies that build employer branding, build their own brands as a great employer brand. Could you share with us maybe some of those strategies that you've seen the companies who are getting it right are doing these days?
Yeah, I think the coolest opportunity, and I think the stuff that has the greatest impact is when companies take this more like document approach to the work that they're doing. So instead of coming out and saying like, these are our values, or this is more like talking about larger cultural things that they're doing, more like documenting the work that they're doing or how they do specific things. So here, I'll give you a couple examples. Buffer, I don't know if you're familiar with the company Buffer, but Buffer is like a social media scheduling tool. They become kind of iconic for their organizational culture, all because of transparency. So if you go to the Buffer website, they have a blog dedicated to culture, and they just like document and like kind of pull the curtain back on all the stuff that they're doing. So early on with our company, we used their compensation model as inspiration and kind of a framework for the way that we did comp. Very untraditional, but they just like laid it out, full transparency. They talked about it. Everybody in their company knows how much each other makes. They talked about like how they don't negotiate salaries. They put this like mathematical equation in place about like how you set your compensation, all this kind of stuff. They're just transparent about it. You read that kind of a thing and you're like, holy crap. One is it's totally different. And two, they're talking about it. Like they don't have to come out and say, this is who we are. They're just showing who they are by like talking about the things that they're doing. There's a company called Loom. Loom is like a video recording software. Loom, I think this might've been last year. Loom came out with this blog post, and it was something along the lines, if you Google Loom 200 videos, you'll find it. And it's about how they recorded 200 individual Loom videos to hire one senior level person. And you read this article and you're like, whoa, this is amazing. One, they're using their own tool. Two, they put so much like time and effort and personalization into like recruiting. You do something like that, you don't have to talk about like much more. You're just going, whoa, these people get it. And there's a lot of examples of that. And so like, the opportunity for companies to just like act like journalists and document the different things that they're doing and then just show that to the outside world, that alone does it. So that's like my big thing right now is I want companies just to document and show. There doesn't have to be a lot of thought that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the whole inspiration that I got with the recent post that you did on LinkedIn, what I specifically recall is that you highlighted the significant value that companies get when they leverage their own employees as advocates of the company brand to specifically around the objective of helping to build a stronger employer brand.
Yeah.
Practically, what does that look like? I guess people are just trying to kind of figure out how does that play out? What does that look like exactly? And why would that approach be effective in your mind?
Yeah. So, okay, I don't know if it's contrarian view on this. It's just different, I guess. And it's what I think is actually more effective. So I think like employees being active is great. It's great for driving revenue. It's great for driving talent acquisition results. It's just an overall benefit to the company. But there's a specific way of doing it that I think is better than others. I am not a fan of employee-generated content that is specifically designed to talk about how great your company is. Oh man, there's a few reasons why. From an execution standpoint, it's very challenging. The idea of putting an app on employees' phones and having them record themselves talking about how great their company is, whatever, and posting that on social, it's really talked about in the industry, but it's really flawed because it's not very authentic. The people in charge of rolling out those campaigns have to invest so much time into putting up guardrails on like what should be talked about, scripts even, things like that, that it usually creates way too much work for like very little results. But what I'm a huge fan of is employees being subject matter experts, talking about their industry and tangentially related topics. So as an example, if you have an employee who is active on LinkedIn as, I'm just going to use thought leader as like the terminology, but who is like a thought leader and emerges as like this industry expert who isn't talking about their organization, who is just like talking about the category they're in, about the industry, about different ways and opinions and perspectives of approaching this kind of work and stuff. That person doesn't have to talk about, here's what it's like to work at my company. That's already implied just by them doing their thing. But smart people who are also in their industry, who are also in similar roles, catch on and see this and go, okay, that's the kind of person I want to work with. That's the kind of team I want to be a part of. That's the kind of company I want to be a part of. Right now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Refine Labs.
Yeah, Chris Walker.
Yeah, Chris. So Chris's company now, I mean, it started off as Chris. And then now you have MJ Peters and you have Megan Bowen and you have like, there's a number of their employees who are active on there and they are just being subject matter experts. That's what they're doing. They're not talking about like how great it is to work at Refine Labs. You're just like following them and you're just like, geez, like if I'm going to work for a marketing agency, like I want to work for them. So that's where I think that the gold is in employee generated content is just let the employees, and there's not going to be that many of them, honestly, and it doesn't even take that many who have takes on your industry and who want to be subject matter experts, let them off the leash, let them go off, build their personal brand, do it as themselves, whatever, and it will inevitably draw everything from buyers to smart people back to your brand. That's employer branding gold. It's the way that it goes. I've been doing my thing on LinkedIn for 2 years, taking this approach. Like I rarely ever talk about our company. I just talk about our industry. My intention is only, honestly, like I can say this genuinely, is to just bring more visibility to my industry as a whole. I just know if I do that, the ripple effects and the benefits that come from it are going to take care of themselves. But if I can help more people understand why employer branding is important and different ways to think about it, the whole industry wins. I don't care where you go to find a solution, you'll find it. But because of that, I have a lot of people reach out to me about wanting to work at my company because they just trust me and they see that I have ways of thinking and they've like latched onto that. And that's a very real thing. And employees are no different.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised. I feel like almost, well, every episode I've been recording this season, Refine Labs, Chris and his team come up as such a great example of a company that empowers its team to just authentically deliver content on their own personal platforms on social, LinkedIn being probably the most popular one. And it's kind of a great segue to my next question, although I think I know the answer you have to it. So I'm going to kind of rephrase it another way, which is, I think that's some of the difficulty that a lot of companies are having when they talk about this whole thing of employee advocacy is, do we allow our team members to generate content that they're passionate about? Or do they just share company generated content? We have a content bank and then they come and they cut and paste. I think I know you're going to be leaning on the side of letting your employees certainly want to just be authentic and just share content that they're passionate about. Why is it that you would recommend, I guess, that approach as opposed to company generated content? Apart from, I guess, the number one reason being authenticity, but generally, what's your view on that?
It just works better. It's not that it just works better. It works better for a reason. If you look at, there's talking about a company is surface level, and trust isn't built that quickly. Trust is built over time. And so the way that trust is built online, especially we're talking more specifically about LinkedIn, the way that trust is built over time on LinkedIn is by following certain people who show up consistently, bringing value, things that make you stop and think, and it's specific and applicable to the work that you're currently doing. That's another reason why I take major issue with a lot of like the algo hacking, like overly generalized posts that are out there. I think like where I was at was about building trust over time. And like going back to what I was saying, I don't care if you're an enterprise buyer, if you're buying software or if you're buying a job, it takes longer to build that trust. And so seeing some posts about how great it is to work at a company, it's just going to take longer to get there. But if I'm a sales professional and VP of sales at XYZ like startup is posting continually stuff where I'm just like, whoa, this person thinks just like I do. They think differently about the industry. They're doing some really innovative stuff or whatever. Your path to trust is so much faster because you can get inside of the way that they think about the work that they're doing, the problems they're solving, and things like that. It's like you're going there. That is relatable and relevant. And it's about the things that I'm thinking about. The other stuff is just going to take longer. And I might even view it as just like BS, like, really, again? Because let's face it, I'm going to be super honest here. Like the majority of content that comes from a company about a company is polished, is overly generalized, and just frankly, just isn't created well. We're not talking about marketers who are creating that stuff. We're talking about HR people who are creating that stuff. Nothing against HR people, but they're not marketers. And that's all I think about is like, what does the market care about? And what's the quickest path to trust to get there? And I just think like subject matter expert is just like, it's the way to go. And again, too, you put it out there inside your company and you go, hey, if anybody wants to do this, you have the freedom to do that. Or let's have a conversation about you doing it, whatever. There isn't going to be hundreds of people who emerge out of nowhere and go like, I've been wanting to do this and I haven't been able. It's going to be a handful of people. But at the same time, if you post out on Slack or you have this like bank of like company content and you go, hey, everybody, remember to post this. They're going to be like, are you kidding me? Maybe I don't even like working here.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah, right. But this small army of people, this like handful of people can have a huge impact on your industry, on your brand, on the way that people perceive you. And that's all we're going for here.
Absolutely. I'm totally there with that. And I'm glad you highlighted it really doesn't have to be a ton load of people. Sometimes companies think that there's some magic number you have to get to. As you say, sometimes it can just be a handful of folks that really can have.
It really can.
Yeah, it really can. Can have great impact. We highlighted Refine Labs as a great company, a great example rather of a company that is doing employee advocacy with employees out there putting out great content. Do you have any other companies that you've been watching and seeing how they've been doing similar things and having a positive impact?
Yeah. Hirewell's a recruiting agency based out of Chicago. They're right there with Refine Labs. They have lots of employee engagement, lots of employees creating content. I mean, if you go to the Hirewell website now, they have like a whole like media site. They have a handful of like different weekly shows on different topics. They have a number of podcasts. They do video. They do a lot. They invest a lot in this and they have a lot of employee buy-in. They're a wonderful example.
All right, great. Thank you. Definitely check them out.
Yeah, for sure.
They're on LinkedIn too as well?
Hirewell, very active, yes.
Great. Awesome. Definitely look out for them. So I'm sure there's some folks listening and they're like, okay, yeah, sounds great. I'm sold. How do I get started? What do I do to kick this off in my own company?
I would do a couple things. If we're talking about content that drives recruiting results, there's a couple things that I think every company should do. You should look at this like by team or by function, depending on like how big your organization is. I think every tech company should have an engineering. I realize that it's hard to get engineers writing, but at the same time, companies who are able to, or who do have some engineers who just have an affinity for writing and want to get their thoughts out, having an engineering blog that is hosted anywhere, Medium, Substack, whatever, where your engineers are just like talking about the work that they're doing in engineering speak. It doesn't have to be weekly. It could be monthly, whatever. That attracts people, other engineers who are interested in those things, and engineers want to get a look inside of what's being built, how it's being built. And that's huge. You can replicate that idea across every department where you're just talking about the work that you're doing. So you could do it with sales, you could do it with marketing. This is all I'm talking about, is just like documenting the work that you're doing. Now, if you want to get also one like creative idea, if you're you Slack or whatever messaging channel you use internally, if you created a channel and create this initiative where like at whatever cadence, daily, weekly, whatever, you are going to post in that channel a like thoughtful question about the work that you're doing or something about your company, something that isn't just like surface level, not like, why do you like working here? Don't do that. It's like something like layers below. If anybody wants questions, just go to beforeyouapply.com. There's a whole host of teams that we've interviewed. Steal all those questions. Just do it. They're easy.
Great. I'll leave that link in the show notes.
Yeah, we've invested a lot of time into finding the right questions, so you can just go steal them.
Awesome.
Post questions, and then you're going to get employees engaging because they're going to be able to answer questions that are like fun and exciting and like relevant to the work they're doing and make them think. It also makes them appreciate why they're there or remember why they're there. There's a whole lot of benefits to it, but you're going to get employees commenting. You can gamify it. The 1 or 2 replies or comments to the question every week that get the most like emojis or likes or whatever it is, that can be repurposed into external content. That's just like an easy mechanism. You post in Slack, you take it, you put it outside. Like you start doing that. And then I would also just put it out there. I realize that the internal workings of a company are never simple. They're really messy and that there's layers of approval that might be needed. But if you're a function, I would go to people on my team and just say, hey, has anybody like wanted or been thinking about putting their thoughts out publicly about the work that we're doing or about how you approach the industry or whatever? If anybody says yes, either just approve it or get approval, whatever you need to do to like get this person off the ground and going. That's where I would go. I would not even right now, I wouldn't even bother with trying to figure out big employer branding initiatives and things like that. I would just figure out how to get the people in your company who have smart things to say, saying them.
Yeah.
You do that and then you get 1 or 2 people even who just like create a following and then you can do all kinds of things around it. Like we did, the whole reason I started posting was purely as an experiment. That was it. It was just like, I said to my team, I was like, hey, I'm passionate about our industry. I have some things to say. How about I start posting on LinkedIn? I mean, granted, this was like 2 years ago, but I was like, how about I start posting on LinkedIn? I'll do it for 6 weeks. We'll see how it goes. If it's not working out, then we'll stop. So be it. But if it does, then maybe like we'll keep doing it, whatever. And I just told them, I was like, please give me full autonomy. Don't police my work. Just let me run with this. And everybody was like, okay, do it. Seriously, that's it. That was like kind of the conversation. And then it started taking off. And then as a result, I've built like a well-followed newsletter off of it. I've built a popular like biweekly webinar off of it. There's all kinds of things you can do that companies are probably thinking about, like, how do we do that? We don't have an audience, but you can just build the audience by just like letting some people talk.
Yeah, I love that because it's really, I think probably the biggest concern or when people think about this, and I know for me as a marketer is, how do you find these employees in the company who really want to have something to say? And do you formalize it? Do you put a structure in place? I've heard one of my former guests talk about maybe even putting in place some kind of pilot program. I guess that's what people are trying to figure out is, what do I do to put this in place? Or do I just say, hey, guys, if you want to establish your personal brand as a thought leader, you have some things you want to say you're passionate about, go ahead. And just kind of, I guess, maybe, you put your social media policies in place. At the end of the day, these little things in the back that kind of keep the brand safe, or certainly try to. But I think it's really what you're saying is, it's just really about empowering your employees to use their voice for those who want to use it, and just say, hey, go forth.
One company that I've seen successfully pull off like a structured framework is Qualtrics. Qualtrics has put in place, it's really smart, just templates kind of thing, like a structure to tell employees stories. And for employees who want to tell their stories, or I'm not sure like how they go and like market this internally, but they're successful at doing it. Employees can like go in here and fill in their story, but it's guided, right? It's guided by a structure. And they have over 3,000 employees. And so far employees have told stories. They've done it with over 10% of their employee population. That's unheard of content in employer branding. 300 plus individual stories being told, it's unheard of. And that's a really smart framework to do, especially at a company that is that large. So there's that route, which is definitely safer. And they do a lot of other stuff in addition to that. I still do think that finding those employees who want to have a voice, I don't think it's that hard. I think that department leaders or senior leaders, whatever, know who those people are. The smaller your company is, the more close you are to those employees. But function leaders have a sense of who those people are. I would imagine function leaders themselves are like starting to think about this stuff. And if they're not, they really should be. They should be leading the charge. Like every VP of sales, I can't believe that every VP of sales isn't building their personal brand on LinkedIn. It's like where salespeople are.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand. Just, you're right there. It's like where every salesperson is. It's laughable to me right now where like recruiters now are in like such high demand, right? So like companies forever put no effort into recruiting recruiters. And now all of a sudden recruiters are in such high demand and the supply is low. And companies are like, we got to hire recruiters. And I'm like, why hasn't your head of talent built their personal brand over like the last couple of years where every smart recruiter wants to work at your company? Because recruiters are on LinkedIn. I don't get it. Anyway.
Yeah, the memo hasn't gotten around far
I know,
enough yet, I
sorry.
guess.
I have my opinions.
I'm sure there's some folks listening when we talk about, okay, we want to empower our team or members of our team who want to build their own brands on LinkedIn or wherever, Twitter, and they want to share content about things that they're passionate about. I'm sure, I guess, probably the folks in legal and risk I would want to have something to say about that. And again, we appreciate that because, these are things that help keep us safe when necessary. What would you say are some of the things that companies need to, I guess, watch out for as they're looking at utilizing more employee brand advocacy as part of building an employer brand? Any pitfalls, anything they need to kind of watch out for?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the nice thing about LinkedIn is overall, LinkedIn's pretty safe and pretty nice. I mean, compared to like other platforms, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There's different types of content and there's different platforms. If a team wants to create like a publication on Medium, for example, or on Substack, and you have different contributors, well, that's pretty safe. You're talking about work and things related to it, whatever, like the guardrails on that are like pretty well established. It's as you start getting into like more different social platforms that thing's starting to widen up and you start like exposing yourself to like somebody flying off the rails, basically. And I don't think there's anything wrong with limiting the things that you can talk about, because that's not limiting a person's personal freedoms, because they can go on Instagram or on Twitter or whatever as themselves. They can do whatever they want. But if we're talking about something that is like an initiative that your company is like backing and you're doing it on company time and it's part of like the work, I mean, then there's some things there. And it's just, hey, maybe we keep this focused on like the work we're doing in our industry and we don't talk about polarizing topics that are outside of that because that's attached to our brand. It's like, hey, I'm not going to, but this was never put in place, but I'm not going to go on LinkedIn and talk about my political views. For one, it's just not valuable to anybody. And it's just not in what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to like influence my industry. I'm not trying to influence people to think about candidates that I care about. So that kind of thing is there. I think it's sensitive and we got to be careful about not taking things away from people. But at the same time, it's like, there's just responsible ways to go about it. It's not an easy thing. And I understand the fears that are there, especially as companies get bigger and you have more legal structures in place, but you can pull it off. You can pull it off. And I get it. Not everybody, like most people aren't going to do the stuff we're talking about here. But the few that do are going to like really see some massive like benefits, especially like long-term ROI in like the categories of talent, retention, and revenue. They're all there.
I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One question I guess some people may ask is when you talk about an employee advocacy program to build employer brand, where's the center of excellence? Who owns it in the company? Should it be marketing? Should it be HR? Somewhere else? A partnership? What's your view?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see it normally following in HR, talent acquisition there. I mean, companies, especially smaller ones even now, are starting to have somebody who's like fully in charge of employee experience or employee engagement. If you have that granular of a role, then it's probably that person. But like somewhere in like people ops is probably like where this falls, or at least like who can lead the charge. But I see this more falling on these function leaders, a CTO or like a head of engineering, VP of sales, a CMO, who can like oversee like the content that is being created by the people who are like within their structure, helping to facilitate that and figure out the best ways to do it, because it's all different and those audiences are different. I've had some amazing conversations with CTOs who understand that their number one job is to recruit and retain talent. It's not to build product. And that's a mindset that is, I 100% agree with, and is also very rare. And so they take this approach of, hey, employer branding, especially the branding of my engineering team in the engineering communities that we want to like be part of, is extremely important. And so I put initiatives in place to help my engineers and our engineering brand, not our company brand, our engineering brand, have publicity and awareness in the right circles so engineers want to come work for us. And it's amazing what it can do. And if that mindset then, so it could be led at a higher level, but I think it should be like managed and executed down at this function level because it's different. Like an engineering audience and like the kind of content that could be created and distributed out to them is different than, let's say, getting your sales team talking on LinkedIn where all of salespeople are, or maybe marketers talking more on Twitter and like marketing community. It's different.
Yeah. Do you see a role that the marketing function could play in supporting the people team, the people ops, or where employee advocacy is concerned, or even just, I guess, employer branding in general? What kind of role? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Because why I ask the question too. So I work with a company that I think enjoys rather a strong brand, both on the client side and on the employer side. So it probably, I think, has a lot to do with our founding values. I talk about the fact that we're a financial services company. Our founding value is love. And we say that our purpose as a brand, as a company, is to cause our clients to experience love and to realize the inherent greatness that's within them. And we have that same belief for our employees, our team members as well. And what I've found as a CMO is that the strong employer brand actually also has a great ripple effect on the external brand, the customer brand, because there's so many people who know about how great it is to work at JMMB. They want to work at JMMB. And clients are like, hey, I want to do business with a company that treats its people well too. And so I like being a part of employer branding activities. Like my PR officer knows that a focus on people activities that generate a strong employer brand is actually part of her objectives as a PR person, because I just see it as so important. So that's why I asked the question of how marketing could perhaps support.
Yeah. When marketing has that level of buy-in and appreciation for employer branding, it sees just like the business value in it, everything changes. Historically, there's been a big disconnect between marketing and employer branding, and employer branding has sat on an island. I think what you just described, and I kind of mentioned this earlier too, where the idea of brand equity now is just a thing that isn't even categorized by consumer and employer. It's just like brand because of the behaviors and the way that the general market overall thinks about who they support, what they want to work for, all that kind of stuff. And I think that employer brand or a person in charge of that side of the market and a CMO who's in charge of that side of the market should really sit under one roof together. And you basically have the CMO of the people org and you have like the CMO of the consumer product org working side by side and just basically aligning on one message, but just sharing it contextually to two different audiences. I think that is like the future of this industry. And if a company is like really thinking about this stuff strategically, they'll have like really like side by side CMOs who just see who just like are hyper focused on just two different sides of the market. But that way, like you're talking about full on brand alignment, messaging, content, creative ideas, everything is just fully aligned. They're just looking at it like, okay, how does it affect this market and how does it affect the other market? Stuff can go next level when you do that.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Well, Nate, this has been an awesome conversation. We're just coming to the end. We've been looking at really all the different ways that companies can realize the significant opportunity and benefits of how employees can really become awesome advocates for not only the company brand as a brand, but as a strong employer brand as well. Nate, for all that we would have discussed, is there any key nugget or takeaway? What's the biggest takeaway you'd want our listeners to come away with based on all we would have discussed today?
I would say the easiest way to start creating content that like really matters is to just document the work you're already doing. Document it in a way that showcases the uniqueness, the different approaches, pull back the curtain on this stuff, but just like document the stuff you're doing. Start the work you're doing as a culture, the work you're doing as a product team, as a sales team, as a marketing team, whatever it might be, just talk about the work you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it and the problems you're solving and the challenges you're facing. Just talk about that stuff in a lot of different ways and you'll have a lot of really great content for a long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And allow your people to do what they do. That for me certainly was the strong message, is that we really don't need to be dictating to folks about what they need to be posting, give them the nice cut and paste content in whatever platform you use. But while companies do that successfully, and we certainly respect that, at the end of the day, I think I agree with you that there's so much opportunity from even a handful of employees who just want to even establish out of the need to establish their own brands or personal brands as thought leaders, to just talk about what they're passionate about. It's way more authentic. It certainly drives greater engagement, and your company brand gets to go along for the ride. And I think that's a great takeaway. Nate, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time. First of all, I know you're a very busy person, but your tremendous expertise and insight and experience. Nate, my final question, which I ask all my awesome guests, is how can we, the internal marketing tribe listening, how can we support you?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very generous. Let's see. If you want to know about the work we're doing, go to beforeyouapply.com. I post regularly about this kind of stuff on LinkedIn. So you can just search my name on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter called Nate is Learning. You can actually access it from our website, but yeah, you can check me out there too.
Awesome. Great resources. So we'll include all of those links in the show note so folks can just click and find you there. And yes, guys, if you're not following Nate on LinkedIn, certainly do. Awesome content just about every day, which is great.
Yeah, I do. I post a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nate, for your time. And of course, as always, I thank you, my internal marketing podcast audience, who could tune in every single time we drop an episode. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. This was a great conversation about how company brands can leverage employee advocacy to build the employer brand, which is just as critical as the external customer brand that we work so hard to put out every day. Great discussion here with Nate Guggia. And of course, guys, if you find this content to be valuable, feel free to share it with anyone who you think would find value in it. And of course, tune in for the next episode. And thanks again, everyone. And please continue to stay safe.